What does it mean to be loved? I once wrote a post about this, and I thought maybe we could start off by sharing that and unpacking that, especially within the context of it being Men's Mental Health Month. I don't agree with these distinctions between men and women about mental health and about emotional well-being, but there is some value in focusing on each one separately, because there's this prevailing narrative that has developed that believes that we're supposed to be the same in how we experience and how we express emotions. So here's what I wrote, and hopefully this resonates, and if not, tell me why. To be loved, to be seen beyond the facade, to have the essence of who we are known to those we trust and hold dear, to be heard, not only when we cry out, but also when we speak gently of the troubles in our heart. To be loved for more than how we make others feel, but to be loved for what we need in return without having to claim it. In that order, because a voice without an identity is not a voice, it's only a whisper in the wind. A face without a voice is only window dressing or a trophy and not a complete being. And love? Without love, love without a reciprocal embrace, an embrace of what we hold within, as well as what we willingly give, is an empty love that tends towards bitterness rather than beauty. Love beyond lust or infatuation is rare. True love is never abandoned. I see you, I hear you, I love you. 3 of the most valuable gifts you could ever give. But you cannot give what you don't have. For this reason, you must first see, hear, and love who you are before you will be able to share it with another. Not only share it with another, but before you will be able to see it in another. And that's why it's so important to come back to this differences and the subtleties between men and women. We were never intended to be the same. We were never designed to be the same. We never grow up feeling the same way or seeing things the same way. And there's natural inclinations that we've experienced for eons that differentiate us in many important ways. But that differentiation has been seen as problematic. And that's why we've now got to a point where men are trying to find themselves within the context of a narrative that has been shaped by women when it comes to emotional experience. And we have women who are trying to find themselves within the context of a narrative that's shaped by the way men have always enjoyed certain privileges, and they automatically see that as a source of liberation if they can enjoy the same privileges. And that's where we go wrong. We go wrong by looking at what we think we need relative to what we don't have compared to others. And then we set out trying to achieve that, trying to acquire that, trying to have the same or better. And we think that's a reflection of our worth and our value and how it is that we're owning our life. But what if that is actually a distraction? Not what if. That is a distraction. It's a distraction because it directs our attention at external points of references rather than internally. Rather than getting to know ourselves, we get to know everyone else amazingly well in our own heads, and we then rely on that understanding to shape how it is that we can evaluate how we're doing for ourselves. And that's how you get people who would otherwise be completely passionate about doing something that is not mainstream, for example, but they would give it up because it's like, no, who's going to respect that? Who's going to see any value in that? I'll probably be laughed at or mocked or ridiculed or ignored or whatever it is, or shunned, because that's not what society likes, and that's not what the people around me will respect. And that's how you end up with growing up in houses where, and I say houses, not homes, because when this is the focus, it doesn't feel very homely. But when you grow up in a house where the focus is on what you have to do to be respected rather than who you are, so that through that self-respect you automatically know how to respect others. And that's the problem when it comes to be seen, to be heard, to be loved. We don't see ourselves except through the lens of others. We don't hear ourselves except through how we want to be heard by others, and we don't love ourselves except through whether or not we feel loved by others. And as a man, that becomes that much more daunting, because now with the prevailing narratives and the mainstream dialogue that's happening in this space, we're trying to connect with those concepts, with those experiences and that sense of being and that sense of significance. We're trying to connect with it within the context of how it's being framed. But we don't operate that way. I had an interesting discussion with someone yesterday where this point came up, and one of the things I mentioned is that when it comes to emotional expression and experience, men experience emotions just as much as women experience emotions. How we express it and what we need done about it, two totally different things. And I'm speaking on behalf of men here, and if there's men out there, if there are men out there who disagree with me, by all means, please share your thoughts and become part of the conversation. But so when a woman experiences a certain emotional experience with her partner or with the people around her that matter to her, or something that's important to her, there's always a very real focus on acknowledging and allowing expression of that experience. And women themselves, it's a cliche, almost a stereotype, because it's so common, would tell you that I don't want you to fix anything or to make me feel better. I just want you to hear me. Just listen to how I feel about this, why I'm upset about it, whatever it is. I might even know that I'm wrong about it, but I'm still upset, and I want you to know that I'm upset, even though I know I'm wrong. That sort of thing. And I'm not taking a dig at women. This is just, that's the way they process it, right? For men, we'll feel the anger, we'll feel the frustration, we'll feel the disappointment, we'll feel the hurt, the betrayal. But we don't want our feelings to be acknowledged. We want the impact of the behavior or the experience to be understood. Both we want to understand it ourselves, because when we betrayed, for example, from a person who we never expected to betray us, we were left kind of gobsmacked about how did this happen? What went wrong? What did I miss? How did I not see this coming? What was it that maybe transpired that gave them reason to do this that I just can't seem to connect with? You know, all of those sorts of things. It's always about a rationalization and understanding of why, not what. And when men lose sight of that and they give themselves into this is how I feel and you will acknowledge how I feel and all of that sort of thing, they give up their agency to be able to exercise that nature of theirs, that analytical, practical, problem-solving nature. So anger is a real thing, right? It's a good example because the way women and men express anger is very different. And I always joke about this with people, but there's a lot of truth to it, I believe. That if someone is having a gender identity crisis and they having that conflict, just make them blisteringly angry, and the way they express that anger will give you immediate insight into what's their natural biological gender bias, so to speak. Anyway, that's a conversation for another day. Back to the way men experience things, and this is important for both men and women to understand, because as we see this kind of dissolution, this dissolving, this merging of identities between men and women, that's creating more problems than anything else in society, because we're losing the harmony, we're losing the balance, we're losing the counterbalance that we're supposed to offer to each other so that we can maintain an overall rhythm in how it is that life works. As we lose that, because we're trying to be so inclusive and so universal about everything, slowly but surely the wisdom of understanding why we feel the way we do as a man versus a woman and vice versa, that's being lost as well. So now we're reinventing the wheel, and with every reinvention what happens is that you go through this sense of inflated belief about how it is that we know something that the previous generations didn't know. And we then implement that and we test that and we live by it until it starts failing us. And when we fail at it, when it doesn't solve the problems we hoped it would solve, or it creates new problems that we never saw coming, then we start thinking, now I can understand why the elders or the previous generations did it that way, or why they had that balance, or why certain role definitions were in place that worked. So it's always in hindsight that we understand why. And that's a very expensive way to go through life, right? To like always first try out, make the mistake, and then learn from it, when there's more than enough opportunity to be able to learn before you actually go and exhaust yourself in trying to figure something out by yourself. Sometimes, and I can accept very easily, that there's a lot of times when we don't necessarily have access to the resources or the sources of wisdom or advisors or the kind of guidance that we need and insight that we need to be able to determine how's the best way to go about navigating something. And in those cases, we need to then just brace ourselves and understand that the more mindful we are, the less likely we are to make a decision that's going to have like enormous detrimental consequences. But at the same time also, with our best intentions, we have to realize that there might be something short in our method, that when we try it, and when we live by it or implement it, that there might be a negative consequence that we didn't intend or anticipate, but we own it nonetheless, because that's part of the self-respect, right? We respect ourselves enough to appreciate that we don't know everything, but at the same time, while we don't know everything, we're also going to accept responsibility for making right what we didn't intend to make wrong in the first place. So when it comes to a man's experience of the emotional spectrum, so to speak, a man looks to solve the problem. And if they can't solve the problem, they go quiet. They go quiet because that's the contemplation. That's the internalization of, well, if I don't have something different to contribute towards this problem that we're experiencing, then there's no point in contributing what I already have contributed before that hasn't resolved the problem. So I'll rather remain silent until something changes about it. Especially if I believe that I'm not at fault for what it is that I'm contributing and I'm just not understood or something. If I have exhausted all efforts to try to be understood or to create understanding, then what's the point of continuing to talk about it, right? Whereas women, on the other hand, need to see the dialogue and engagement all the time, because that feels like there's still a vested interest in wanting to solve it. And that's why you get all of these kind of myths about the harms of silent treatment and all of that. Again, a topic for another day, but a very important topic about how it is that forcing someone to speak when they don't have anything to say or they're not comfortable to speak, that is just as abusive as you feeling that their silence is abusive towards you. So we need to be careful about how it is that we go about judging other people's choices in how it is that they show up, because there's not a single person who I know or have ever encountered, and even from personal experience, where if I felt truly hopeful about being able to make a difference to a situation, that I would rather remain silent instead. No one does that, because our innate nature, our core of being human, drives us to want to be of positive consequence to others. And it's when that positive consequence comes under threat or becomes a futile exercise because we're just not being received the way we would like to be received, or our efforts are just being misconstrued, or our intentions are being distorted or slandered, or whatever it is, then we withhold, right? Because it just doesn't make sense from a practical, analytical perspective, which is the way men process things. It just doesn't make sense for me to keep trying at something where my efforts are either diminished, dismissed, not appreciated, or are distorted into making it seem as if my efforts are the problem. So that's how it is that we need to understand that when a man comes to the table and tries to have a conversation about something, they're looking to solve a problem. And the men who are coming to the table looking to just be heard, they've lost themselves. And that's a bigger problem to solve. So what we're looking for in a situation is based on our vantage point, is based on how we believe someone should handle something. And that's where, again, we go wrong, especially in relationships where we're expecting our partner to show up in the way that we need them to show up, rather than seeing how their efforts to show up is a reflection of what they truly feel towards us, right? And that goes both ways. So if we talk about to be seen and to be heard and to be loved from a man's perspective, to be seen means that I shouldn't have to remind you about what it is that I do willingly, because that's my commitment to wanting to create a comfortable life for us, for example. right? And I shouldn't have to scream and shout and repeat myself about the same thing before you take me seriously about it, because then I don't feel heard. So just because you're listening and acknowledging, but you're not acting on it or showing appreciation for why it's important to me, that doesn't give me reason to feel heard. And this applies to both sides, right? And then to feel loved, you can't love me the way you want to love me, because if the intention is for you to love me, and similarly, if it is my intention to give you reason to feel loved, I can't tell you that this is how I love, so you must just accept it, because then I'm not loving you, I'm loving myself and I'm trying to secure my relevance in that, and I'm wanting validation and acceptance for my effort. If there is a sincere connection, if there's a sincere sharing of understanding and collective purpose between two people in a relationship, then that way of showing up, that love that we want the other person to feel, has to be because they feel seen and heard. Without that, there's no amount of love bombing from either side. Men are not the only ones guilty of this, trust me. Women are just as guilty of love bombing as well. And we do the love bombing when we've got nothing else to secure our presence in the way that we want it to be secured. So, when we get to that point, we need to understand that it's about how we want the other person to experience it, right? What is important to them? If I tell you that I'm not even going to go to the love languages thing, because that's just another hocus pocus crap that distracts us from the person in front of us and distracts us from ourselves as well. Because there's no person that has the same love language when they engaging with a child as opposed to engaging with an adult, as opposed to engaging with a partner or a colleague or whatever. If you go to work and you tell people that your love language is acts of service, and your role doesn't require acts of service from them, and that's going to affect how it is you feel about the people you work with, it's just ludicrous. Anyway, come back to that another time as well. There's a lot of topics that we need to unpack at another point as well. But coming back to feeling loved, the way I want to love someone has to be relative to what it is that they value, not what I value for them, right? Because that's part of being seen. If I want to feel seen, it means that what is important to me, that I've expressed, that I've shared, that I've been passionate about, that I've discussed at length and all of that, my effort to be seen and understood, to let the other person know that this is why I think this is important. If that is completely dismissed when we get around to that, like say for example, family gatherings. If I tell you how important a family gathering is for me, and you come from a background, or my partner comes from a background where family gatherings were not a norm, then they might feel smothered or might feel stifled or might feel suffocated by having to have these regular family gatherings. Now, who claims what's right in that case? It can't be about personal preferences. It has to be about which one of those approaches is going to be the best outcome for the family unit, for the relationship, for the life you're trying to create. And the one thing that you will discover at some point, whether you do it willingly or unwillingly, that will determine the level of pain you go through in discovering it, is that social circle, that belonging to a broader village, that is critically important to the level of peace and fulfillment and understanding and harmony that you experience in your relationship with each other. One important thing is that if you both have different villages that you're always drawn towards, then that's not going to lead to a very harmonious marriage, because there has to be commonality in that. There has to be some shared spaces there around that village. There has to be a merging of it, right? So when something like that comes up, and it's probably a very loaded example I'm using, which is why I'm going in circles around it, but when it comes up to something like that, and we're talking about if family gatherings are important to me, then my partner either sees it as, okay, so I have to now surrender, and what I want and what's important to me doesn't matter. That's a very selfish way of looking at it. Similarly, if I know that family gatherings for me is a normal thing, so it comes naturally for me to be in that space, and my partner isn't in that way inclined because it's just something that isn't comfortable for them because they didn't grow up that way, then I need to work at understanding and assisting in a gentle transition into understanding why it is that I believe this is a good thing. So experience the joy and experience the fulfillment and experience the overall kind of happiness and wholesomeness that I believe is true about family gatherings. You need to experience it with me so that you can understand why it's important. Not, I don't want to disappoint my family and you mustn't disrespect my family by keeping me away from them, and then I must choose between who do I make happy, do I make my parents happy, or do I make my partner happy? And then we start talking about rights and responsibilities, and we're solving all the wrong problems. And that's how the way we approach a problem solving, or the way we approach any difficulties or points of contention in a relationship, it can't be with this generic kind of understanding of this is how you must express yourself and this is how you must understand. It's about recognizing why someone understands it a certain way and why someone expresses it a certain way. There's no one size fits all. There's no template that you can use to say that this is what healthy emotional expression looks like and this is what unhealthy emotional expression looks like. It's not about that. It's about context. And it's about the context between the two people involved in that interaction, in that relationship. Because that context is very different to the context of any other relationship. That's why one relationship, they might be okay with screaming and shouting at each other in like a burst of energy and have that powwow, and then they get over it and they hug and they make up and they move on. That works for them because that's the dynamic they struck. Someone else comes along and looks at it and says, no, you're not supposed to raise your voice at each other because it's very disrespectful. No, mind your own business. Let each couple set their own tone, but understand that when they set a tone between themselves, that tone mustn't dictate how it is that they treat others. So there are universal kind of experiences of what feeling respected is about and things like that. So you don't go and scream at your elders, for example, right? And I don't care about the people who come with their libertarian kind of ideas about how it is that your voice must be heard regardless of who you're speaking to and all that nonsense. If you're a child, know your place. If you're a young adult, know your place. If you're in your 30s, know your place when you're speaking to someone who's in their 50s and things like that. And not because I'm advancing in my years. But here's the thing. If you believe that your voice always has to be heard, then you're not looking to listen. You're not looking to learn. And if you're approaching a discussion with someone who has many more years of experience at it, whether you respect them or not, it doesn't take away from the fact that they may know something about it that you don't. Not may. Very high probability that they do know something about it that you don't. So while you're being cocky and abrasive and abrupt and confident in your own distorted way to want to speak to them as if they're your equal, they're not your equal, and you never will be their equal because they'll always be a life stage or 2 or 3 ahead of you in life. And that's what you need to remember, is that life, we're all doing it for the first time. So the first time you get in your 20s, that's the first time you're in your 20s. But someone that's been through their 20s already, they'll be able to tell you like, hey, don't take that so seriously, or don't assume that that's the best way to do things because this is what happens down the line. And if you're not willing to listen to that because you think, nah, I'll show you, times have changed and we've got things going for us now and we understand human nature better than you guys did and all of that nonsense. It doesn't work that way. Life is life. It's going to humble you when you least expect it to, despite your best efforts and your best intentions. And the only way to soften that blow is to be receptive to input and understanding from others. So when it comes to being a man and your mental health, I don't like the term mental health, but let's call it mental health for now. It's just about emotional well-being and being able to self-regulate. And if you want to call that mental health and you're losing sight of the emotional experience and you're reducing everything to intellectual experience. So for men who are having difficulty being understood or finding a balance or being able to communicate or express yourself, understand that the reason you are struggling with that is because you're not understanding yourself well enough. So that struggle for understanding is part of you trying to solve that internal problem, but you're not communicating that. You're holding someone else accountable for recognizing your frustration in not being able to get through to them. Your frustration, your anger, your sense of futility is yours to own. And whether you've got a good enough reason to be angry doesn't warrant the expression of anger. And how you express that anger then can't be something that's going to be harmful to others around you. And it can't be something that's going to prompt you towards making irrational decisions in the spur of the moment that you're going to regret later on, because your regret later on is not going to change the impact it has on the lives around you. That's the kind of balance we need to strike. That's the kind of sense of self and understanding that we lose when we're raised in a house that is filled with focus on what you must become in life, not who you are. You see, one of the things that many would be able to relate to is that when you are not questioning your value in a certain space, it becomes a lot easier for you to add value in that space. But the moment you feel undervalued, or you feel ignored, or you feel as if you're at risk of being discarded, then you start acting from a position of threat, which changes your disposition, changes your focus, changes your composure, and then you make bad decisions and you act badly. So that internal composure that we feel as men, even as women, and this is the difficulty, is that a lot of what I talk about is universal in nature, but experienced and expressed differently and internalized differently. And that's those differences that I'm trying to draw attention to, because emotional experience, expression, and availability is important to both sides. How we become aware of that and how effective we are at navigating and communicating and expressing that, that's where the difference is coming. But trust me, being human is just as important to a man as it is to a woman. But a man needs to feel human differently from the way a woman feels human. A man needs to feel respected differently to the way a woman feels respected, and similarly they feel appreciated differently to how a woman feel appreciated. And that's where we've lost the plot, because we've given too many women who are victims of bad relationships, we've given them too much of platforms, too many platforms from which to set a new narrative. And that's where we've got these isms that have come from that, the feminism and things like that that's come from that, the sexism and misogyny and patriarchy and all of these things that have become offshoots in trying to fight for dominance in that space. The point is that we need to start just stepping back and realizing that men and women are different by nature, but our needs, our emotional needs, and our need to feel fulfillment and to feel purpose and to feel significant, those are the same. But we're not going to need to experience it in the same way, and that's where the sweet spot lies. Because when you start understanding that difference and you start finding a balance that complements each other in that way, in the way you want to feel understood, in the way you want to feel loved and feel heard, that changes from both sides. And if you're so focused on wanting to be heard and wanting to be loved and wanting to be understood and wanting to be heard and seen and all of those things, if you're always focused on wanting, you're not going to spend enough time listening. You're not going to spend enough time observing how it is that you might not be actually doing for them what you're demanding they must do for you. And that's how you end up with a power struggle that you don't realize you're actually entering into. So take a step back. If June is Men's Mental Health Month, then let's focus on how men experience things so that it can create understanding both within the men themselves who are struggling, and also it will create understanding with their partners and their family members around them and significant others around them who might be able to then respond differently so that they can help them navigate the difficulty they're experiencing. And hopefully through this understanding, you will see a softening of the positions and you'll see an opportunity arise from that just makes it easier for us to strike that balance and that harmony that everyone wants, not just women. Men want it too. And just because people are distracted by the frivolous nature of bling and lifestyle doesn't mean that they don't need the same thing. They're just looking for it in the wrong place. I'm Zaid Ismail. I hope that's something of value for you, and let's build on this conversation again as the month plays out. Take care.